Hello, hello, Dr. John Jaco Guderson here, the singing psychiatrist. When we think of depression, we think of, well, I'm not sure what people think of when they think of depression. Obviously, everybody goes through times in life where they feel down in the dumps. That is part of life. That is part of what people go through and at times need to go through. It actually helps us to become better people. I did read once in a book, one of my favorite psychology books called The Road Less Traveled, about the healthiness of depression. That when we are trying to make a change in our life, a change in our character, some kind of a switch, we can get down in the dumps about it and maybe avoid making the change because we're feeling depressed. We convince ourselves, oh, I'm so depressed about this. I just can't face it. I just can't do it. The response is simply to give up. But that's the last thing you should do. That's why it's called the healthiness of depression. There's times where we feel down, times where we feel nervous, and therefore we want to run away. But precisely the opposite is what we need to do. We see this in an infant. An infant keeps on challenging themselves, keeps on trying harder and harder. Failure does not discourage them. Failure does not defeat them. There's different ways that people experience depression. There's some people who simply experience losses, a serious loss like the loss of a spouse or loss of a parent or, God forbid, the loss of a child. And of course, we need to go through grief. We need to go through times of mourning, how much we miss that person. It's important. I've seen a number of people who don't go through that grieving process, and then a few years later, they're in a total funk, huge, deep, dark depression, and simply do not know what to do with themselves. So that's another, I guess, healthy type of depression. Then there's some people who sort of get comfortable about being depressed. They sort of, maybe once upon a time they were looking for some kind of meaning in their life, but now they realize that, they don't know what their meaning is. They don't know what to do. And they just sort of get down in the dumps. They get used to it. The depressed poet, the depressed writer, who's just sort of feeling his or her creativity through their depression. Now that may be advantageous, perhaps for some creative souls. But for other people, it might be just a sort of self-involvement, self-flagellation, let's say, where they're just sort of embedded in their own depression and self-involved, just thinking about themselves. And it almost becomes like an addiction, almost a preferring to be depressed, as if to say, woe is me, look how tragic my life is. The problem is that sometimes they get so self-involved they don't really do anything about it because it becomes sort of a comfort zone for them. The psychiatric definition of depression goes through particular symptoms that need to last for at least a week or longer, every single day, very many minutes of every single day. And this collection of symptoms include dysphoria, which is a sadness, anhedonia, which is a loss of interest in things you usually would like. For example, I will watch a Steelers football game and I'll enjoy it. If I suddenly don't enjoy it, one could say that that's a sign of depression. Oftentimes in depression, a person loses their appetite, or sometimes they start overeating. They can't sleep. They have difficulty falling asleep, staying asleep. They wake up early in the morning, or sometimes they just hug their bed and fall into excess sleep. They can't concentrate like they used to. They feel helpless and hopeless. And of course, in the most serious of cases, they just give up. They give up on life altogether. They have a death wish, or even worse, they may have suicidality. Now, what we know is people who go through these deep, dark, palpable depressions, there's usually a genetic basis for this. And so you need to look into your family tree. And there may well be other people who are blessed, let's say, or cursed with the DNA which is embedded in their DNA and their neurons and makes them more susceptible to these depressions. So what to do? Well, there's a lot of things that we can do. Sometimes it's just a matter of somebody getting off the couch, getting out of bed and getting themselves into action mode. Action, in fact, is incredibly important. And oftentimes I will tell somebody, just work out, do cardio workout for the next week, at least 30 minutes every day, and come back and then we'll see if you really want to be on medication. Because oftentimes these people want medication, sort of looking at medication as a type of quick fix. Other things, of course, which is, besides exercise, healthy eating, and of course, good sleep hygiene. But the problem is that eating and sleeping sometimes are part of the problem. So it can be difficult to get out of that pit. Antidepressant medications can be incredibly effective for those who truly have deep, dark, what I would call biological depressions. The theory is that many people do not have enough of a neurotransmitter called serotonin swimming around their body. So they take these antidepressants, these serotonin antidepressants, of which I think Prozac is probably the most famous, but there's also Zoloft and Paxil, Celexa, Lexapro, and they'll help a person to make their body to have more available serotonin, and then it improves these symptoms that I listed of depression. There's other kinds of antidepressants as well, those that work on something called norepinephrine, and a medication in that would be nortriptyline, also called Pamelor. Then there's that primarily affects dopamine, and that's Wellbutrin. And I've just seen incredible turnarounds with these medications. But most of the time, these medications are not a panacea. They don't change everything. They just take the person out of the pit of depression and bring them back onto the level of playing field. And from there, a person needs to use their skills, their discipline, their behavior to get themselves again into action mode with exercise, with good diet, and with sleep, to get into action mode and start to do the things. Of course, many people say, I'm so depressed, I can't do anything. I can't get myself into action mode. And that's where behavioral therapy needs to take place, because behavioral therapy is you don't wait until you start feeling like doing something. No, you get yourself into the action mode and the feeling will follow. You do the action first, and then the emotion will come with it. If you want to wait for the emotion, well, you could be waiting a long, long time. These antidepressants, yes, they can be incredibly effective, but sometimes they can sort of blunt a person's excitement for life. So you need to be very careful about that. Of course, ultimately, in my mind, what's most necessary is for a person to know what their mission is, to know what their purpose is here in the world. I'll say for myself, when I was a senior in college, I was going through my own deep, dark depression. I felt lost. And I translated this into what I wanted to do with my life, what my career should be. And so I was perplexed and obsessed, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. So I went to a rabbi and told him, and he looked at me with his sweet eyes, and he said, John, what you really need to do is to understand really who you are, what your heritage is, where you came from. What is your soul telling you? And I turned to him and I said, Rabbi, you don't understand. I got to figure it out now, exactly what I want to be, what I want to do. And he said, again, he repeated himself, get in touch with your inner self, with who you really are, with your soul, and your purpose will evolve naturally. I didn't listen to him. I was like many college students, just not able to hear what he was saying. But oh, how right he was.